Hey, good to see you this morning. We're on week 2 of our series, What Was I Thinking? And it's important, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had these thoughts, though. I related to some of those things that were up there, because we think things and then, like, wait a minute, did I really just say that, or did I really think that? What was I thinking? But more so, it's important to understand what was I thinking about God. And that's really what the series is about. For 4 weeks, and this is week 2, we're talking about what you think about God. And that's an important, in fact, that might be the defining question of our lives. The most important thing is not what you're going to have for lunch today or what you're going to do this week. It's what do you think about God? And that really is the question that's driving this whole series. What do you think about God? What do you think about God? And last week we talked about this whole issue of John, what are you eating? Don't show that yet. You're killing. We're not showing that one either. Pay no attention to the guy in the back. What do you think about God? I mean, that's the truth. And here we are. We're all sitting in church going like, I think good things about God. Hey, you know what? I was having a conversation with my friend up here before service, and we were talking about some hard things in life. And there are times that we have to admit, and we talked about this in our Sunday school class too, there are times when my thoughts about God weren't always good because I didn't always have good things in my life. I remember I lost my mom, I lost my dad, especially when I lost my mom. It just was, everything went the wrong way, went south, and I didn't think good things about God. And when you go through rough situations, when you go through times of, we've gone through in the last 5 years shutdown for COVID and vaccinations and all kinds of craziness. We've gone through political stupidity, and we're still in that mode too, by the way. We've gone through all kinds of hardships, economic ups and downs. I mean, just don't go to the gas stations here in Seagrove, because they don't have any. I don't know what's going on there. I'm not trying to panic anybody, so don't do a rush on things, but good grief. And yet, none of those things are really that important. It's what you think about God that's super important. It's amazing how we have people all over the place that we're going to spend extra time preparing for our Monday work, but you know what? You ought to be spending some more time thinking about what God is or who God is in your life. And the problem with this is what I said last week. We have an adversary. If you didn't know this, you have an adversary, and it's not the person that you think is your adversary. It's Satan. Satan wants you to fail, and he's good at this. Don't underestimate him. He is a liar. He is the master liar. In fact, that's the only language he knows to do. And he has propagated this false belief, this hoax about who God is. It started off with our great-great-great-great-grandparents, Adam and Eve, way back in the Garden of Eden when he said, God's holding out on you. Don't you know he's a mean God? He didn't really say those things exactly, but he questioned the truth about God. And he caused Eve, and then Adam followed his wife because he didn't have the guts to stand up because he knew what God had said, but questioned what God was all about. And they acted like, I'm not really sure I know who God is. And what you think about God is so important because the world today, and I think this is so important because some of you students are going to go back to school tomorrow. Yay. No student saying that one. Some would be like, I'm okay going back to see my friends. I'm really not really hoping to have homework and all that. But and the parents are like, this is the great day for the parents. They're like, yeah, kids are going back. They need something to do because they're driving me crazy. But there's going to be teachers, there's going to be professors, and I hope it's none of our teachers here. But there's going to be teachers, there's going to be professors that are going to say things about where we came from. Things like, you were just some protoplasm floating out there, and the next thing you know, you decide to put on shoes and pants and shirt and walked around and called yourself a man. And that's crazy, but there are people that believe that. There are people that said there is no God, that you're all alone in life, that there's nothing going on. And that's the lie that Satan's trying to tell you. And some of us as Christians, we know that's not true. We believe in God who created us, but you know what? We've been warped in this hoax to believe that maybe there's a little bit of this truth when bad things happen to me, when my parents, when my kids, when COVID, when cancer, when all the rest of these things start going wrong in my life, then maybe there is a God, but maybe he doesn't care about me. I know, I felt that way before. I imagine you probably have too. And you may have been told, don't believe that. But I want you to know what you think about God is so important. That's why we're taking 4 weeks to talk about this. And we're going to present you with some truths today. Because last week we talked about the fact that God is more powerful than we think. But this week we're going to talk about another aspect of it. We're going to talk about the fact that God didn't leave you alone. God's right here next to you. In fact, he's already given me the screen on this one, but the first half of my statement today that we're going to work through is God is more present than we think. We are not alone. And that is the truth that we want to unpack in our lives because it's so important. See, even when you don't look for God, even when you don't notice God, even when you don't feel like there's anybody with you, God is present. And that's a truth you can count on. But here's the problem. We can often pretend. Did you hear that word, pretend? We can often pretend that we're all by ourselves. We can often pretend that God's not around, and we can deny God's presence. We can refuse to acknowledge it. But the truth is, all the time, we actually know that he's there. There's a word that we use in our culture now, and some of you, I would imagine everybody's heard this term. Maybe you don't know exactly what it is. The younger people can be like, yeah, it's an old term. But there's a term called photobombing. And I wanted you to think about it, but I thought, well, maybe I'm not going to explain it well. So I have a picture that I wanted to show, and it came from a couple of years ago. Our ladies, we were celebrating the 4th of July, and several of our ladies got together, and because they were all dressed so nice in colors and all that, they took a picture. And if you look in the back of that picture, there's a guy. Same shirt. He only has one, so no, I'm just kidding. But there's this guy in there, and Rob joined in on this, and he is doing the photo bombing. Now, I want you to remember this picture for this reason. The pictures always helps us remember things. Photo bombing. Photo bombing, if you look it up, it's going to say the act of someone jumping into your picture who doesn't belong, who wasn't supposed to be there, and they're making faces, and they're trying to disrupt your picture. That's Rob. He was doing it. It's funny, though, and it's funny because we use that picture on the front of our church brochure. I like the picture, so it was a good picture. But anyway, that's how we do life. Now, I want you to take your own mind and put yourself in the place of those ladies. And as you go through life, that's you standing there. And the problem is you're standing there through all the events of your life, through all the issues, through all the different obstacles of life. But you don't see there's someone behind you. He's not really photobombing you, but he's in your picture. He's in your camera view. He's always there, and his name's God. See, God is the original photobomb. You always thought you went through some of the darkest moments of your life all by yourself. You cried and said, there's no one here. But God was always in your camera angle. He was always there. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't making faces. In fact, I'll get back to this at the very end. You don't forget the photobombing thing. But that's the truth. See, it breaks God's heart. The truth of the matter is, it breaks God's heart when you don't acknowledge him being there in the picture. When you don't actually look around to see if he's watching. Can you imagine? See, God's a relational God, and he wants to know you, and he wants to have this intimate relationship with you. That's why he calls us sons and daughters of his. And he wants us to be part of it. And when we deny the presence of God in our life, we act like God's not even there. When we do things that you know God, when you do things you know you shouldn't do, and you wouldn't do if God was there, but you act like he's not there, but in reality, he really is there. It breaks God's heart. And we act as if God's not there, and we act as if we buy into the lie that Satan's trying to tell us that we're all alone, all by myself. It's just me versus the world. I got to take it all on, and you don't have to do that today. You don't have to. See, the majority of people today in society deny who God is. They're looking away. They don't look to God. They pretend that God's not there, that he doesn't exist. That's why they had to come up with evolution. Got to explain how we came about, because there is no God, right? It's one of the key tenets of humanism. Because I'm the most important thing, and we say those kind of things. But all the time while you're looking, you realize there is somebody in the back, somebody in the picture, somebody who was hung on the cross, who died for your sins, and he's gone through these things. And you know he's there because God's always there. God's always present. See, when you go to sleep, God's there. When you wake up, God's there. When you go to work, God's there. When you kids go to school tomorrow, and you teachers, you know what? God's there. When you're at lunch with your friends, God's there too. When you watch TV, yep, God's there. Because God's always present with us. You're not alone. And he's more present than you think. And the question I would ask you is, how long are people, how long are you, how long are I, how long are we going to pretend that there is no God? That God's not really present with us? David, we talked about him last week. David, the great king of Israel. The guy who, for those of you like, I don't know who we're talking about. The guy who fought Goliath, right? We got that story. Most of us, even if you didn't go to church, grow up going to church, you know that story. David wrote some profound things about some truth about the presence of God. Over in Psalm 139 verses, and I'm only reading the whole Psalm's about it. And I encourage you to go ahead and read the whole thing the next time you feel lonely. But hey, this is what God said through David. Psalm 139 verse 7, David says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" Verse 8, he says, if I go to the heavens, he's talking about outer space, he's going as far as you can go. He says, if I go there, you know what? You are, say it, there. If I make my bed in the depths, some of the translations say hell, but it's still meaning as far down as you can go. What does he say? You are there. Because God, he understands that God is always there. Skip down a couple verses. In verse 11, he says, if I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me. Verse 12, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for the darkness is his light to you. He says, I stand out like a neon light in the middle of darkness. It doesn't hide me. Verse number 15, he says this, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Before I was even born out of my mother's womb, that's what he's saying, you saw me, you were always there with me. Over in Psalm 11, verse 4, he says this, the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord is in his on his heavenly throne. He observes everyone on earth. Why? Because he's always in your camera view. He's always photobombing you. His eyes examine them. That's what he's saying. David understood, and this is way before they had smartphones. It's way before Rob Davis decided he'd do what he did. God was always there. And some of you, I know you struggle with the pain of your life because you think, God's not there. He's left me all alone again. And that's a lie that Satan's been telling you, because he doesn't want you to know that God is more present than you think. You're not alone. You've never been alone. And that's the truth. God is always among us, is what David would tell us. And you remember, last week we started the story about this guy, and if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in 2 Chronicles chapter 15 today. But there's this guy named Asa. He was the king. He's the great-great-great-grandson of David. He's the king of Judah, and we explained how Judah and Israel became two separate nations. They had a civil war. Anyway, Asa's the king. And last week we talked about the fact that Asa had this huge deal. This 1,000,000-man army, the Cushites, had come against him. And that was pretty overwhelming. In fact, last week we said that God is more powerful than we think. But the issue is, I'm not often helpless, and neither was Asa. Remember, Asa had 580,000-man army. That's a pretty good-sized army. They had shields, and they had spears, and they had bows. But they faced an army that was twice their size with 300 chariots. And that was the state-of-the-art weaponry last week. And Asa learned this idea that we're not always helpless, but we're often powerless. But God's more more powerful than we think. And he invites us to tap into his power. And that was the whole idea last week. This week, we see this guy, God in the life of Asa is going to work, and we're going to see this whole idea. But here's what Asa would tell us before we get into our passage here. God is present, but you can pretend he's not. That's what Asa would tell us. And that's the sad truth of Asa's life. See, Asa pretended that God was not present. Now, he started off good. When he first met that huge problem, he prayed to God, he acknowledged God, he went right to God. He said, God, you're always present with me. And he trusted God, and God gave him the victory. He faced that huge army that we talked about. But along with that, along with understanding that God's more powerful, God was also making the point that he's more present than we think. He's always with us. And God was engaged as Asa prays. God was engaged in his prayer. God was listening to his prayer. God was moving and working. God showed up because God is always present. In chapter 15, we pick up the story. Now remember, this time has passed here, but this comes after the whole battle of the Cushites, after they've defeated the Cushites, and God has given them lots of wealth. He's blessed them. This is what happens. In verse 15, chapter 15, verse number 1, it says, the Spirit of God came on Azariah, son of Oded. He went out to meet Asa and said to him, and listen, this is so important. He says, listen to me, Asa, but not just Asa. Listen to me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. So Judah and Benjamin are the two tribes that make up the nation of Judah, the southern tribes. He says, listen to me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. This is the great statement here. This is where I underline my Bible, and I don't know if you do that or not, but this is what I would do. The Lord is with you. The Lord is with you when you're with him. Read it with me. Say it out loud. Everybody read it. The Lord is with you when you are with him. Whew. Hey, we can just stop there because that's great. You know what he's saying? You are never been alone. You faced a 1,000,000-man army twice your size. You know what? You weren't alone then. And you know what? When you face a small little thing, you're not alone then either. In every issue of your life, that's what he's telling them. In every issue of your life, you are not alone. You are with God, and God is with you. That is more present than you ever think, because most of us, we live our lives and act like God's not even around. We listen to things we shouldn't listen to. We watch things we shouldn't watch. We say things we shouldn't say. And you know, when we do that, we're saying, God, you're not even here. And God is more present than we think. You're not alone. He goes on to say, if you seek him, he will be found by you. Isn't that great? God's not playing this game where you can't find him. It's one of those things, you know, got to find the will of God for my life. You don't have to find it because it's not lost. I just gave you a secret that nobody knows, because I don't know how many preachers I've heard say that the will of God needs to be found. It doesn't need to be found because it never was lost. You know where it's at? The Lord's my portion. If you were in our Sunday school class, you understand what that means. You don't get hope in God until you get the portion of God. Book of Lamentations, chapter 3. You want to go back and look it up. If you seek him, he'll be found by you. He's not hiding. He's standing in your camera frame. He's always in view. He wants to know you. He's relational. But, and this is one of those big buts of the Bible, but if you, and this is what we always do, but if you forsake him, I hate reading this because this is this hard part. If you forsake him, he will forsake you. Whew. Those are hard words. And yet, you remember, this isn't because you failed. This isn't Asa, you're a moron, you did the wrong thing again. No, this is Asa coming off victory in his life. The man of God comes and says, I just want you to know, man, things are going good, and I'm gonna drop some heavy truth on you right now. When God is with you, it's because you're with him, because you're acknowledging him. See, God never leaves us. That's the truth he's giving to us. God is always photobombing your life. In the darkest problems of your life, you can be assured God is there. Man, doesn't that make you excited? Hey, you know, I didn't say bad things aren't going to happen to you. Okay? I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel here. We don't believe that. But you know what? When the bad times come, God is with you if you are with him. That is the greatest hope we have. And if you're sitting here today going, man, I didn't feel like I had any hope, you ought to have hope. Because he wants to be with you. God said, in the New Testament, he said this way, he's not willing that any should perish, but that all, every one of us, all would come to the knowledge of him. That all would repent. That all would be saved. And maybe you don't get that. But I would tell you in this, you know what he's saying? That God is always present and you're not alone. you're not alone. You can't be alone. It's impossible to be alone. If you'll turn around, that's what he's saying. If you'll just turn around, you're going to see that guy in the back. He's photobombing you. If you'll turn around, he'll acknowledge you and you'll acknowledge him. And you know what? He's a father to the fatherless. He's hope. He's the balm of Gilead. He's the best thing you could ever hope for. But you know what the problem is? If you forsake him. If you forsake him. See, God's fully present all the time. Verse 3, it says, we continue on, for a long time. I like that. For a long time. But you can look at it this way. For a long time, but not all the time. For a long time, Israel was without a true God. Without a priest to teach and without the law. Verse 4, it says, but in their distress. Isn't that always how it happens? In their distress, in your distress. Might have caused you to come back to church, come back to God. That's what happens. You know, churches were packed the Sunday after 9/11. You know why? Because in their distress, they turned to the Lord. Why do you think you get problems in life? God always uses bad things to bring us back to him. He does. God always uses pain. He doesn't waste it on you. If you're going through pain in your life right now, you may not understand it. You may never get under. Hey, Job, ask Job if he understood it. He didn't. You may say, why, God? It's okay. Don't disparage God, but he doesn't have to explain it to you either. But he doesn't waste it either on you. He says, in their distress, they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him. And what was the promise that he just got through? If you seek me, you're going to find me, right? If you seek me, you're going to find me. So in their distress, they stumbled on the truth that God's always there, and they sought him. And you know what that truth is? When they sought him, he was found by them. Isn't that amazing? God doesn't lie. It was real. It was real. And you know, I could stand here all day and tell you story after story of people, and even my own personal stories. When God was sought by me, you know what? I found him. He wasn't lost. All I had to do was turn around. He was in my camera angle. He was in my camera shot. He was photobombing my life. I thought I was by myself, but I really wasn't. And you're going to need to know this because God is more present than you think he is in your life. And you say, well, no, that's not a problem. You know what? If you're sitting there thinking it's not a problem right now, it's because you don't have any problems. When you go through a problem, you're going to need to know this. Hardest, darkest times of my life is when I lost my parents. I needed to know this. Somebody needed to tell me this. That's true. That's why I can tell you this. Seek him, and he'll be found by you. And notice this, in verse 7, it goes on to say, but as for you, be strong. Be strong. Okay, so often we get this order wrong. We try and be strong first. But you realize you're supposed to seek God first. It is important. You got to seek God first. Go for God's presence because the only time you are strong is when you're with God. But as for you, be strong. Do not give up, for your work will be rewarded. Verse 8, he says this. When Asa heard these words, those words right there, when he heard just what we read, and the prophecy of Azariah, son of Oded, the prophet, that was the one about God is always with you, right? So what happens? He took courage. He took courage. Because when you're going through problems, you know what you need? Some strength, some courage, don't you? Asa, you know what? You got good things going on. Yeah, you beat that 1,000,000-man army. God gave you the victory there, but I want you to know you better file this one away. You're going to need some courage down the road. And so I want you to hold on to this truth. Be strong, because God's always present. Don't forget to look for God in the pictures of your life. And so what did he do? Because he was courageous, he did some things that are amazing here. Look what it says. It says, he removed the detestable idols from the whole land of Judah and Benjamin. Do you think there were some people upset about that? Oh, yeah. That wasn't a popular thing to do. He took down idols that people have been worshiping. They're false gods. He says, we're not going to have this anymore because God's present. I don't need this piece of junk here. I'm not going to worship the things I was worshiping. And he says he removed the detestable idols from the whole land of Judah and Benjamin and from the towns he had captured in the hills of Ephraim. He repaired the altar of the Lord. Hey, you know what they had? They had a downright revival. Why? Because when you realize that God is with you, there's nothing that's going to scare you anymore. There's nothing going to stop you anymore. When you realize that you're going through things, and the things didn't stop coming, but when you look around, you got God, you don't have to worry. He repaired the altar of the Lord that was in front of the portico of the Lord's temple, and that's the amazing thing. See, the presence of God gave Asa courage. That was Asa's experience. But 20 years later, we saw this last week, 20 years later, another enemy showed up. Baasha, king of Israel. and Asa was powerless, we knew that. But what Asa did that hurt him when he was powerless is he became prayerless. And you know why he was prayerless? He was prayerless because he pretended that God wasn't there. And isn't that what we do sometimes? We get to that point where we don't pray. We don't turn in our pictures of our lives and acknowledge that there is a God. We don't look for the solutions that God has. We don't even ask the question, God, where are you? What are you doing? We're not looking for him at all. You know what we're trying to do? There's no God here. I have to handle it myself. I have to figure out how I'm going to get a better job. I have to figure out how I'm going to make it through a bad economy. I have to figure out what I'm going to do. And we try and figure our own solutions out. And God's sitting there going, I got this. I got this. Trust me. Lean into me. Acknowledge my presence in life. See, even when the prophet, the seer, Hanani, and we read this last week, so we're not going to read it again this week. And if you weren't here last week, look in 2 Chronicles chapter 16. The prophet, the seer, Hanani, comes along and he says, hey, you know what? Hey, Asa, I want you to know that God's been watching you the whole time. He's standing in your picture frame. He's photobombing your life. So don't forget that he's always with you. Even when that truth was put clearly in Asa's face, where he was reminded, hey, you know what? It was God that defeated that army. You know what Asa said? No, you're wrong. God's not here. God's not present. You know, it sounds like kids do that, don't they? Some of these teachers, they could tell some stories. You know, some of the best stories really are from parents and from teachers because you see what your kid's doing and all that. And with that in mind, sometimes we deny the presence of God. It's just like a kid who denies things like, did you eat the sprinkles? Take a look at this.
John, what are you eating?
Nothing.
You didn't eat anything.
Yeah. Nothing.
John, look at Mommy.
Anything.
Are you telling me the truth?
That.
You didn't have any snacks?
Nope.
Let me see. You didn't have any snacks. Open wide, let me see. Really? You didn't have any snacks?
Yeah.
John, can you explain to me why the sprinkles are empty?
Well, they're not empty.
John, look at me.
They're not empty.
Did you eat those sprinkles?
No. I did not.
You know it's not nice to tell stories and to lie, right? Look at Mommy. You're not supposed to lie. Tell me now. Did you eat those sprinkles?
No. I did not. Your sprinkles.
John, you have sprinkles on your face.
No. I did not eat sprinkles. I did not.
John, you got sprinkles on your face. No. Isn't that how we are sometimes? I've had my own kids do stuff like that to me. I mean, just amazing. And I'm sure that all the teachers in the room could tell you that same kind of story. But you know what's sad? That's sort of a picture of how we are, isn't it? That's what Asa was doing. Hey, you know what? In the face of all the evidence, as Hanani the seers come to Asa and said, hey, God's looking. He's looking to strengthen the powerless. Remember that? That was last week. He's looking to help you. He sees everything. He's present. You know what Asa was saying? No, I don't think so. No. I don't have any sprinkles on my face. I didn't eat anything. And he's just as silly and as sad as that little boy in that video that went viral years ago who denies having eaten sprinkles even though all the evidence points to it. we can pretend something's true when it really is true. Something's not true. And it's right there in front of us. And the last 6 years of Asa's life, Asa said, no, there's no God, so I'm not going to pray to him. Even though he helped him win that first war, that big, huge war, even though everybody was warning him, even though all the facts that we've just read were in front of him, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he was pretending like there's nobody in the picture with me. There's no God. I have to do this all myself. I have to come up with plans all myself, and we do this all the time. No, I don't need God. I'm going to figure out my own way to figure out my family's finances, and I'm going to figure out my own way to raise my family, and I'm going to figure out my own way to do my things here and there. We leave God out of our pictures, or at least we think we do. And Asa, if he were here today, you know what Asa would tell us? He would say, you can pretend that something in life's not true, but in death, you will know the whole truth. In death, you realize that you've just been pretending. That's what Asa would tell us. You see, the truth of the matter is we're not on our own. We're not alone. God is always present. And Asa would say once again, hey, you know what? Instead of that moment where I pretended that I didn't have any sprinkles on my face, instead of that being that moment in life, I should have turned around. I should have seen God. I should have celebrated the presence of God. I should have stopped believing the hoax that Satan was telling me, because God was more present than I ever thought. See, God's in every camera angle of every moment of your life. But if you don't look for him, you'll not see him. You're not going to find him. And if you knew that God was more present than you think, then the question would be, how would you live? Which gives me the second half of my statement. God is more present than we think. You're not alone. And he invites us to lean in to his presence. That's what God's inviting you to do. God invites us to lean into his presence. And that's what he was telling Asa. Asa, lean into me, because it will transform you, and that's the truth of it. See, the presence of God changes us, doesn't it? Should. Hey, you know what? We should walk into these doors every Sunday realizing the presence of God inhabits the praise of his people, and realize that when she says, hey, we're going to sing, it isn't about the song, it's about the God of the song. That's what worship's all about. We sang about the goodness of God. And you may have not felt like it was a good week for you, but the reason you didn't feel like that is because you weren't leaning into the presence of God. Because even in the midst of pain and problems, you know what? The presence of God brings courage. And that's the great thing. It transforms our lives. And I would say this. Let me give you 3 things that transforms this today. I call them the ABCs. Now, these aren't the only 3 things that'll transform in our lives, but these are 3 good things, and I think you see them here in this passage. First of all, the A would be anxiety. Anxiety. Because I don't know about you, but I realize this might be one of my biggest downfalls in life. There's this whole issue of anxiety that when the weight of things that I cannot control overwhelms me, the things I can't manage, things like finances, right? Because you never know what the economy is going to do. You don't know how the gas is going to be up, down, or even if there is any. Jobs, family, kids. It's the reason I don't have any hair, I'm just telling you. Kids, the future. And yet, the problem is I'm a control freak like most of you guys are. We talked about this a couple weeks ago in the book of James, didn't we? We want to control everything. And so we make our plans as if God's not in the picture, and it causes us to have more anxiety. It really does. Years ago, I was in Tanzania on a mission trip, and I went to one of the modern wonders one of the wonders of the modern world. Let me say it correctly. There's a place, and you may have never heard of this place before. You can look it up. It's called the Ngorongoro Crater in Tanzania, and it's an amazing place. It is a crater. I don't know how many miles across it is. It's huge. Now, according to them, it's not formed because of, they don't know what formed it. I'd say God. They claim it doesn't have the impact of a meteor or anything like this. It'd be massive. Because if a meteor this size hit the Earth, it'd probably break the Earth in half. That's how big this crater is. What's amazing about this crater is scientists say that within this crater, there is representation of every form of life on the continent of Africa. And the reason that it happens is because the walls of this crater are so high, it's like climbing a mountain. Seriously does. We went up and it felt like it was going to snow on us on a nice warm summer day. And then we descended down. It took us hours to go up and hours to come down in a vehicle. I couldn't imagine ever walking. So the animals don't even try and get out. They stay in the Ngorongoro crater. And it's amazing when you go there. It's like being in a movie, a National Geographic movie. It's all the different animals that you can see, and you can see tons of them. But I remember one time, and what's great about this crater is there are places in it that looks like desert. There's places in it that looks like a swamp. There's places in it that there's lakes and beautiful jungle and just all kinds of different things to support all these different types of animals. And I remember we were down by some of the water holes, water area, lake area, and I'd been sick on this trip. In fact, I don't want to tell this part of the story, but I almost died coming out of this trip. Came back, and a couple weeks after being back in the States, I was in the ICU unit for a long time. In fact, they told my wife, come get the family because I'm not going to make it. And obviously I'm here, so I made it. So, I know, spoiler alert. Should have told you that ahead of time. But the truth of the matter is, while we were there, I was feeling so bad. I lost about 100 pounds in 10 days. That'll give you an idea. I didn't have a belt that would hold up my britches. I was walking around carrying them around. I was that sick. And I was not feeling good, and I didn't want to be anywhere, and we didn't have the proper clothing for all that cold weather, and it was cold that day, and so we're freezing, everybody's shivering. But we wanted to go on this trip because that was, that's a highlight. You don't get to go do this very often. It's expensive. We'd already paid for it ahead of time, so we went in there. And we're down by the water, and we've seen all kinds of animals. And the animal I'm going to tell you is not that exciting to see. You've probably seen them, or at least in pictures, or maybe in a plastic representation of one, because it was a flamingo, okay? Pink flamingos. But it was the coolest thing because as I was sitting there looking around, there wasn't just a couple of flamingos. There wasn't just 100. There's probably 10 to 15,000. I mean, it looked like the grass was pink. And they're all standing there, one leg in the water, the other leg, I don't know what they do with it, but they had it hiked up somewhere. And they're just sitting there. And they're looking at us, and we're looking at them, and they've seen enough people, they don't care. You're not going to scare them. It'd take a lot to get them scared. And I was feeling so poor that day. I was having a hard time holding things down, holding things in me. Eating was a problem. Smells were a problem. I was that sick. And I didn't feel like being there. And all the guys, I think I was ruining it for the other guys there. I was trying to be, not about me, trying to help them feel better about it. And we're looking at these birds, and I thought, God cares about the birds. Because I started thinking about how bad I felt, and I started feeling sorry. You ever had a pity party? Started worrying about it. What if I don't make it home? What if my wife doesn't have a husband anymore? What if my little kids never see their dad again? And I started thinking things like that. And I remember thinking, God cares about the birds. He does. God cares about the birds. In fact, over in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus made mention of this. Over in Matthew, in chapter number 6, and I'm going to just read you a little bit of it. Matthew chapter 6, in verse number 25. He says this, therefore I tell you, he's talking about this, he's talking about worry and all that. He says, don't worry about your life. And I was like, yeah, that's me. And he keeps going in the next verse. He says, I'm cutting this short because I know it's been a long time, but he says, look at the birds of the air. Are you not much more valuable than they? And I'm sitting back going, sometimes I just forget you're there and how much you care, God. My anxiety gets the best of me. And if you keep going down several verses in this, he says this, and this really killed me when I read this. He says, for the pagans run after all these things, the things that I think are so important in my life. The pagans worry about these things. You know what when he uses that word pagan, you know what he's referring to? People who don't believe in God. Okay, I know that's pretty simple. But what he's saying here, get this, what he's saying is, These people have to worry because they don't have anybody to worry about it for them. You don't have to. So why are you worrying? And then you flip over to Philippians chapter 4. Yeah, and all the people that have anxiety, we hate this passage, don't we? Because like we've heard preachers say what I'm going to say, that you don't need to worry about it. But the truth is, as we get to this passage in Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, Paul, the Apostle Paul, and I've cut down some of this just to keep it short to make sure you understand what he's saying. The Apostle Paul is talking to the church in Philippi, and he says, church, I want you to know something. The Lord is near. And you know what he's saying? God is always present. Because the reason I'm scared about things, the reason I spend all night trying to figure out things, the reason I worry about my kids, the reason I worry about my finances, my job, my spouse, the reason I worry about all this stuff is because I forget God's more powerful than I think, and he's more present than I think. He goes on to say in the next verse, he says, don't be anxious. And we all sit back and go, like, that's easy for you to say. Don't be anxious. No, he's trying to help us there. And the reason we don't have to be anxious is because God's always present. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation. Well, you don't know my life. You don't know my situation. You don't understand. I've been diagnosed. Hey, you know what? I think Paul did understand when he said in every situation. You know what he meant? Every situation. That's what the original language means. Every situation. He says in every situation, I should always be looking for God in the picture. Do you get it? He doesn't say, hey, I know sometimes we make it just simple, like, just pray. And we're all like, I don't know what prayer I'm supposed to pray. No, what he's focused on is, hey, church, don't forget the Lord is near. He's in your photo. He's in your camera angle. He's always with you. Why are you worrying? Why do you have anxiety? Don't be anxious. But in every situation, hey, you know what you should do? You should turn around and look at him. That's what he says. He says, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, as it continues, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And if that wasn't enough, he doesn't stop there either. Verse 7, he says, and. When you acknowledge the presence of God, and you let him take care of all the things you're scared about, and the peace of God. Whew. Not your peace, not the peace of Joe Biden, not the peace of anybody else. It's the peace of God. The peace of God, which is so rare, it transcends all understanding, is what he says. It blows your mind. You could say it that way. That's how we'd say it in our thinking. The peace of God that blows your mind this is good, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You know what he's saying there? Let me help you out with this. What he's saying here is that God, his Spirit, is going to guard post your heart so you don't have to be discouraged. He's going to post guard of your mind so you don't have to be confused. He's going to give you peace, that is God's peace in the midst of what you can't control. Because you don't have to. That's what Asa missed. He let the anxiety of his life overcome him. And so what does he do? He pays off Ben-Hadad. Remember we saw that last week. And it didn't help him because he was always at war. See, what he's saying here in Philippians chapter 4 is that God is always present with you in every moment. So you can be fully present in every moment of your life. That's the whole idea. See, if you knew that God was fully present all the time, he was in your picture, he was in every snapshot of your life, it would transform your life. It would transform your anxiety. That's A. B, behavior. Behavior. If you knew God was fully present, it would transform your behavior. I think most of us know who Michael Phelps is, but if you haven't been around or haven't been paying attention in the last 20 years, Michael Phelps has more gold medals, more Olympic medals than any other person ever. He's got more than some countries. He's amazing. But Michael Phelps had some issues in his life. He said this, and I want to read it to you. He said, this is between him winning in his first Olympics and the next one. He said, I was a train wreck. What? He was all over the place, getting all kinds of accolades and everything. He said, I was a train wreck. I was like a time bomb waiting to go off. I had no self-esteem and no self-worth. You know why? Because people told him that he came from monkeys, that there is no God, that He's evolved to where he's at, and he ought to be glad that he has evolved from fish because he can swim better than everybody else. That's what he bought into. He went on to say this. He said, there were times, but I didn't know who I was, and I didn't want to be here. It was not good. I felt lost. Michael Phelps hit rock bottom. He was arrested on a DUI charge. You probably saw posts of him smoking from a bong. Who knows what he was smoking? Some kind of wacky weed. Went viral all over the internet. And everybody pointed their finger and said, oh, he's not the guy. Please don't represent our country. Michael Phelps isolated himself in his bedroom in Baltimore and contemplated committing suicide. He said, I was thinking, this is the end of my life. How many times will I continue to mess up? Maybe the world is better off without me. Strange to hear a guy that successful say that. Phelps went on to have a Christian friend who encouraged him to enter into rehab for his addictions. But that friend didn't just put him in rehab. The friend said, hey, I've got a book that I want you to read, and he handed him a copy of The Purpose-Driven Life. And Michael Phelps read it. Phelps said this about that book. He said, this Christian book turned me into believing that there is a power greater than myself. Woo-hoo. God's present is what he's believing. There's a power greater than myself, and there's a purpose for me on this planet other than swimming. I figured out that it's not an accident. Michael Phelps got his life centered and his soul, more so importantly, centered on better things. Changed who he was. Of course, he ended up with more Olympic medals than any other person ever on this planet up to this date and time. But you know what he also realized? It changed a lot of the things he was doing in life. See, he had fathered a child with a woman. You know what Michael Phelps realized? His behavior needed to change because there's a God who's present with him all the time. So one of the first things he did is he went to her and said, this isn't good. We've got a kid. We're not married. We need to get married and have a family. And that's what he did. Now, somebody's going to come up to me afterwards and go, did you know Michael Phelps did this? I don't know. I'm just telling you his story as I read it. What changed Michael Phelps, though, was the moment that he understood that there was a God present with him, more present than he ever understood, more present than anybody ever told him. When he turned around in all the camera angles of his life, and there was a lot of them, because he was always on film, wasn't he? He was having a hard time doing it by himself, but when he looked, there was a God in the picture with him, and he realized him and God could do just about anything. And that's the truth. See, he discovered that God's more present than he could ever think, and he leaned into the presence of God, and it changed who he was. Kept him from committing suicide. It kept him, changed his behavior, kept him from being an addict, kept him from all the things that could have destroyed his life. It made him a father and a husband. And he desired to be someone that honored God in his life. And that can change our behavior. That's the awesome thing there. Not only will it transform your anxiety, that's A, and not only will it change your behavior, that's B, but C, courage. Transform your courage. Back in our story, we've read this already, I just want to hit it again in case you forgot. 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verse number 8, when Asa heard these words in the prophecy of Azariah, the son of Oded, the prophet, he took what? Courage. He took courage. He did things that he's never done before. He tore down idols. He built up the altar of God. He caused people to worship God in a way that he had never done before. He claimed new territories that had been taken away from him and his people. He did things the right way because it transformed him and it gave him courage. See, when Asa realized that God really was there all the time, that he was fully present, he gained the courage to go after new things in his life. He had a breakthrough. And some of you need a breakthrough in your life. You need some courage. You're still doing the same old things and they're not doing anything for you. You're trying to do what Dr. Phil says or Oprah says or whoever your best friend was, but you don't know what God's saying Because you haven't turned to him. Because you're not sure he's there. And he's always been there. God was with Asa. And God encouraged Asa to lean into him. That's what I'm encouraging you today. See, if you would lean into the presence of God, if you would lean into who God is in your life, it'll change everything about you. So will you seek him? That's the question. Because if you seek him, he'll be found. Will you begin to talk to God because he's with you every moment? Are you going to look for him in the camera shots of your life? Will you talk to him? Will you engage with him? How about this? Which one of the ABCs do you need to transform? Is it your anxiety? Is it your behavior? Is it your courage? Those three things are tough. Maybe it's something I didn't name. You know, I said at the beginning, I talked about the photobomb thing. And I said that we represent those ladies that were standing on the steps, and God represents Rob, but you know that's not really true. The truth of the matter is, in the picture of our life, it's God who's standing on the steps. We're sort of photobombing God's world. We pop up in his camera angle because God is more present than you ever thought. And if God's more present and God's more powerful, how would that change your life today?